Today, we tackle a universal barrier to growth, which is limiting beliefs.
I'm still new. I'm still learning. This is a growth opportunity. When you're coming from that thought, then your feelings are more empowered. You're going to take the steps you need to get that outcome you want. The best practice in terms of coaching is life itself.
People like to say, have a good day. And it's a nice sentiment, but it's a fixed perspective that can put a lot of pressure on us. It's also really hard to define from person to person. What about instead if we ask ourselves, how can I have a better day? At work, at home, in life? That's what this show is all about. The Have a Better Day podcast comes to you from Boone, a personalized coaching platform that helps businesses everywhere to support the whole humans, which are their employees. We have our pulse on what employees are dealing with in today's workplace, and we want to share those insights with you. Welcome to the Have a Better Day podcast. So today we tackle a universal barrier to growth, which is limiting beliefs. These hidden scripts can hold us back from achieving our true potential, both personally and professionally. I know it has in my own life many times before. So I feel very grateful to be joined here by Jen Spainhour, who is an amazing coach at Boone, who specializes in helping employees work through their limiting beliefs. And Jen is an amazing coach at Boone, and she also has a wealth of background and experience throughout the marketing space, consulting, market research, and has now been coaching folks through common challenges that they're dealing with, such as working through limiting beliefs. So Jen, your work has inspired many to redefine themselves, and I'm excited to hear more about that today. And so glad to be here.
Thanks so much for having me, Alex.
So Jen, could you share with us a little bit more about your journey on becoming a coach and then more specifically overcoming limiting beliefs?
Yes, I would love to, Alex. So first of all, I think that I always throughout my career had a connection to people and to their stories and what makes them tick. It started way back in my brand management portion of my career where I was all about the consumer and understanding them and building that consumer empathy, to then going into consulting where it was all about understanding my clients' needs, and eventually into qualitative research where I was actually interviewing consumers and pulling their needs and thoughts out of them. So that transitioned very well into coaching. But the other part of it was this desire to help people with their professional development. And that started, I would say, back in business school. I went to the Cox School of Business at SMU, and we had something there called the Business Leadership Center. And we would do team building types of exercises, personal development, professional development. And I fell in love with it to the point where I became a co-lead of, the student co-leaders. I was one of them. And the next, I think, seed that really planted it for me was the first time I was exposed to Myers-Briggs. And I was a junior marketing person at Quaker Oats at the time, an assistant brand manager. We had a woman come in and do a session for us on Myers-Briggs. And it was so cool to me to see how we can learn more about ourselves and apply that to our teams. And I thought, I want to do what she's doing. And so it's just always been in the background, waiting for me to be at the right point to shift in my career.
So that's such a cool background and this is one of the reasons we love having you as a coach at Boone is you have the marketing background, you have the consulting background, the research background. It's such a dynamic expertise areas in terms of the types of people you're working with, the types of work you're doing. And I think you'd probably be shocked though, as to how similar the challenges might be across different areas in the business that you're working for. So I guess, you mentioned Myers-Briggs, was there another moment or was there a pivotal moment that kind of shaped your coaching focus to be where it is today?
I have two real passion areas. One is in this area of imposter syndrome and limiting beliefs, and the other is in career development and advancement. And I think both of those came out of one moment that happened in my career when I thought things were going well. And I was told by a senior leader that in order to succeed, I need to be more like a pit bull, and I'm actually more like a Labrador retriever. And at that time, I've told this
I saw your LinkedIn profile says Labrador lover. So
exactly. I have a
you
Labrador.
own that. You own that.
I have
I have a golden retriever as well. So we share that.
I've learned to own it, of course, but what I felt in that moment, Alex, was a huge amount of self-limiting beliefs. Because I look back on it now, many years later, and I say, okay, this is what he said. The profile to succeed here is a more assertive, pit bull like person. And everybody loves working with you. You're like a Labrador. And in order to, make it, you're going to have to shift a bit. What I interpreted was you're not good enough. You're not good enough to be here. You don't have the right skills. I mean, talk about imposter syndrome. And it was so much of it was my interpretation of what he was saying. I can look back now and really say, objectively, he was just laying it out for me. He was giving me his form of coaching and
Yep.
telling me that this is what it is. I feel like so many people are possibly in the wrong fit, or they are taking feedback too personally, and they allow that feedback to tear down their confidence. And if I can help them take a step back and see it more objectively from everyone's perspective,
Yeah.
and remind them that they have choice in the matter, that they can view that as a learning growth opportunity and decide what to do with it.
Yeah. I mean, you are hitting on the crux of, I think, some of the biggest themes that we hear from our people leaders that we're talking to is, first of all, I have these younger leaders within an organization who don't quite know how to deliver feedback. But then those same people likely don't know how to receive feedback either. And I could say from personal experience, I remember feeling triggered in those moments of receiving constructive feedback, and that's not at all in the way it was intended to be. And it is so funny looking back on like how personally I took that, and just how much of a story was created around that, where you talk about perception of what was said versus what is actually being said. And you might be creating this whole narrative around what you think that conversation was about. And then it starts to spiral from there. So I guess talk a little bit more, Jen, about like how and why are limiting beliefs so pervasive in today's world? And like, how does that come to be? And how does that overall impact our personal and professional growth in the workplace?
Gosh, that's a big question. I think there's a lot to say there. I think, at the root of it, it is human behavior to go into self protection mode if we feel threatened. And that is just a part of our human evolution. Oftentimes, I know I experience it where I actually feel it in my body before I even make a connection to what is being said in my head in the story I'm telling myself. And we get so involved in that story. We're only seeing it through our own perspective. One of the values a coach can bring is to broaden your perspective and help you see the situation more without all of the emotion, and decide what to do with it. And I think that the hybrid and work from home model may be exacerbating this, may be making this worse
Yeah.
because we don't even have the body language, the eye to eye communication, the stop by for a chat, just that informal coaching that can go on in a team and in a company. And so those assumptions that we take to mean something about ourselves can just fester that much more.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because that is one of the big things we're hearing about. You hear older leaders talk about, "Hey, I've got these Gen Z in the workplace, and I feel like we need to give them constant validation that they're doing a good job." And it's almost like, and I'm thinking back to my own, getting constructive feedback in my own career and thinking about how that triggered me, I think there was an element you mentioned imposter syndrome. I think there's an element of, fear of inadequacy. Okay, well, am I really not good enough? And oh my God, they're validating all of these fears that I had about myself. What is, what, how are we comparing ourselves to the rest of society, which is being amplified through social? I mean, there's just so many things that play a role in all of this. But I think, your view is a really important perspective. And I guess, like, along the lines of COVID, maybe just speak a little bit more about, you don't have the informal chats anymore. What other shifts have you seen in terms of how limiting beliefs are showing up in your conversations versus, your corporate days, and what that looks like now?
Yeah, I think that there's not only the disconnection with a boss or a manager who might be able to give you some more context about something, but even with our peers. We
Yeah.
don't have the same interactions with peers, and therefore a lot of people don't have anyone to talk to about these things and to help them take that step back. They are in
Yep.
back-to-back calls all day, exhausted at the end of the day, which was true in the office as well, but at least you were seeing people, you were walking from room to room, having little chats. So I think that, that all continues. I also feel like there's such a comparison mode that goes on even before social media, and now social media just makes it worse. But we compare ourselves to others, and corporate America doesn't help with that, right? Because there are a lot of methods in which we are compared. So the
Yep.
goal is to be the best we can be given our strengths and look for ways to fill our skill gaps. And I think if I can just talk about this whole feedback situation and how sometimes my clients are heading into their performance review and they're
Yep.
bringing all of this anxiety or even defensiveness in before the conversation even starts. And one of the things I do to help them with these limiting beliefs is to prepare their mindset before they go in so that they're approaching that conversation with an open mind, with the energy of somebody who wants to learn and grow, and to not react. There's such a reaction mode. And what we as coaches teach our clients is how to reflect and respond appropriately and not be that
Yep.
knee jerk reaction, which can happen when we're getting feedback we don't like.
Yeah. And I think those are some really good tools to think about. I mean, heading into your next performance review, if you're an employee listening to this, or just thinking about communicating how to think about receiving feedback as an HR leader for your organization. I think one of the big things that we're always trying to get across in this podcast, particularly, is how can employees walk away with tangible solutions to these issues that seemingly everybody is dealing with. So you just gave some really good nuggets around, okay, you're showing up to a performance review and here are some good things you can be thinking about. I'm thinking to myself, well, inevitably those feelings might start to come up subconsciously, and I don't know if I necessarily have the awareness to be able to know that those feelings are happening, and then I'm, acting triggered, and it spirals from there. So I guess, can you walk us through kind of a memorable use case? You mentioned performance reviews, maybe that's a good one, but maybe just a memorable use case where you've helped somebody transcend through your coaching methodology around this topic of limiting beliefs.
Absolutely. I have a great example that a lot of us would have struggled with. And that's
Yeah.
one of my clients who was actually without expectation on her part, was put onto a performance plan, a PIP. And
Yep.
it really threw her off because she wasn't expecting that. And you can imagine how your thoughts can really bring you down there. So we worked on a framework that basically shows that your thoughts are what create your feelings, and your feelings create your actions that you take, and your actions create your results. So thoughts, feelings, actions, or behaviors to results. And her desired result was to perform at the level they needed her to. This was a sales role, so it's very measurable. So her goal, her desired outcome was to overcome this and to perform at the level they needed her to. If
Yeah.
she was coming from that first initial thought of, I can't do this, I'm not good enough for this, that was never going to lead to a positive outcome. We worked
Yep.
on changing her thoughts and working on believing these thoughts that this is an awesome learning opportunity for me. I'm going to get additional support from the people who are good at this. I'm still new. I'm still learning. This is a growth
Yep.
opportunity. When you're coming from that thought, then your feelings are more empowered. You're more
Yep.
wanting to make this work, and you're going to practice. You're going to take the steps you need to get that outcome you want. Instead, if you're stuck in that limiting belief of, oh my gosh, I'm not good enough, I can't do this, that's going to trickle all the way through the process and you're not going to have the result you want. So it sounds simple. It's not
Yeah.
simple.
Well,
It's simple,
I
it's not
mean,
easy.
so there's some amazing nuggets in there around things that I think we can all put into our lives the next time we have a challenging situation come up like this. I guess, where my head goes is, there is some overlap with some of these items you mentioned and therapy. And so one of the big questions we typically get from our customers is like, how is coaching different from therapy? And just thinking about this specific example, maybe you could just shed like a really broad light on what would be the difference between coaching and therapy in this setting. And then I guess I want to hear, how did this employee do
Yeah.
after she employed these tactics?
Yes, I want to get to that as well. So when I think about, first of all, overlap is a good word, I think, because there can be overlap. I would imagine in a situation like this, if I were a therapist working with this person, I'd want to dig deep into where this belief of not being good enough started. Where in the childhood or in something that maybe we've blocked out of our memory even, that created this feeling of self-doubt that makes it even more kind of close to the surface and too easily triggered. So a therapist might go deep there, and that's important. Some clients use both a therapist and a coach. And a coaching
You're talking
environment,
to one. You're talking to
there
one.
you go, because they do serve different purposes. Now, I might ask that question, like, where do you think that comes from? I'm going to ask that question, but we're not going to go deep. I'm not prescribing anything for her. It's more
Yeah.
focused on, okay, given this situation and what's happening to you right now, how do we get you
Yep.
to your goal? How do we close
Yep.
the gap on where you want to be and move forward? And I'm happy to say, I'm thrilled to say that this particular client really overcame and was able to be the top salesperson just 3 months later and get off the PIP. And
Wow.
she's just grown so much. I mean, I think we know as coaches that we grow the most through challenge, but we also have to see it as a growth opportunity, because if we
100%.
don't see it as a growth opportunity, then it just tears us down. What she was able to do in having these objective coaching sessions was to have that person who's not judging her, which is me,
Yep.
the person who's going to help her have the self-awareness that you talked about earlier, because I don't think that comes naturally. And
No.
to be able to replace the negative self-talk with positive self-talk. And some people do that through journaling. I like to let people actually get all their negative thoughts out on paper. Like, just go ahead and tear yourself up. Just let it all out. But then we're going to take each of those because they're there. Like, let's just not ignore it and pretend that we're
Yeah.
just positive all the time. Let's acknowledge the fear that's coming up. Let's acknowledge the self-doubt that's coming up. It's there. So now what we want to do is challenge it. We don't
Yep.
ever challenge it. So we want to see that and say, what, how true is that? What are other examples in my life when I have proven, yes, I got this job and I have grown so much since then? And really work with very intentionally reframing those thoughts. And
Yep.
it doesn't come overnight and it doesn't come like a light switch. Sometimes we have to want to believe a new thought so
Yep.
that we can work towards the outcome we want.
Yeah, I think that's so valuable. And I think a few thoughts. One, how amazing. I mean, you really don't hear this very often of an employee going on a PIP to becoming the number one salesperson at their company
Right.
3 months later.
Right.
So let's recognize how amazing of a transformation that is up front. And then, this is part of why we feel so lucky to have you, Jen, to be able to go through these sorts of relationships with our clients. But I think as I hear you talking about coaching versus therapy, that really rang true to me in my own experience where I have felt that I have a therapist, I have a coach, they're each very valuable in their own way. I've found my therapy oftentimes to be more past oriented, processing childhood beliefs and behaviors, understanding how that shaped who I am today. It's not necessarily as focused on being a really goal oriented solution. So I think having both of those things in my life where the coaching is more focused on like, how can I get from point A to point B? That has been such a valuable supplement, but still having that processing element to be able to have some of that additional awareness as to where some of these deep rooted fears and beliefs are. So, I'm a big fan of it all, and I think there's definitely value in both.
Can I just add a comment that came from a different client just on Friday? What I find with her, because she is a therapist she's worked for years, is that
Yeah,
our coaching sessions shed light on things that she realizes she wants to go work on more. So,
100%.
we're talking about productivity. And
Yep.
what came up was, when she's being more productive, she has more time on her hands. And then all of a sudden she starts second guessing everything.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like she's creating a state of chaos because when she's super busy, she doesn't have time to fall into, she's doing, doing, doing.
Yep.
So what came out of a discussion around productivity uncovered something that she wants to now go work with her therapist more deeply on that is outside the scope of our coaching, but we
Yep.
identified it. Now she can go to her therapist and say, hey, this came up. Let's work on this.
So that's all really valuable, Jen. I think we've talked a lot about, okay, how can limiting beliefs limit my own productivity and success personally and professionally? But I think the other big aspect of that is how can our limiting beliefs impact others? And so maybe want to touch on a use case around that or something you've experienced in your coaching there as well.
Yes, as leaders, everything we do impacts our teams and those we work with. I was working with a client who had recently been promoted. This is when a lot of these self limiting beliefs can come up, and sometimes they're not just about ourselves, they're about someone we have to start working with. So she came to the coaching session with some dread over a person who's now going to be reporting to her who she viewed as difficult, right? And was worried about her ability to lead that person. So again, she's starting with these negative feelings about a person because of what she has perceived, and therefore kind of entering that leadership position and relationship with that quote unquote baggage. So, what we worked through is, what if you could believe that he has all the potential in the world and ambition? He just hasn't been motivated in the right way. And she ended up taking him to lunch and just having a one on one and getting to know him better and what motivates him, what his ambitions are, what has he been struggling with, and has created a way to work with him that a year later, when it was review time, he said he's grown more in this past year than he has in his entire career
Wow.
because she saw him as he is and assumed positive intent, right?
Yep.
And brought the best out of him.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds so simple, assuming positive intent. And yet I feel like our internal triggers get up and you don't even have awareness around the assumptions you're making a lot of the time. So I think having that coaching ear or coaching voice in your ear around that is amazing. So those are some really helpful use cases, Jen. I think just as you boil it down to there are a few things I want to touch on quickly is just if you're an employee walking away from this session, what are the top three takeaways that you would give an employee who's looking to overcome their limiting beliefs that they're currently working with today or limiting beliefs of others?
I think the number one piece of advice is about finding a way to increase your self awareness. And that typically is by talking it through with an objective person who can help you see the situation objectively. Secondly, it's saying it out loud. I'm surprised how many of my clients, when I ask, what is the thought going through your mind? They almost are embarrassed to say it out loud because they know it's not true. They're like, this is silly, but this is what I'm thinking. When we keep it inside, it grows into a monster and
Yeah.
we don't see it for what it is. And I think third would be to have some honest conversations with people, your boss, your peers. Allow those conversations to happen with an open mind, a growth mindset to say, how can I improve? I want to learn. I'm growing, and project the positive growth mindset that
Yeah.
you want to have. And that will be reflected back to you.
Yeah, and I think at the at the crux of this, it does take a willingness to grow. So there has to be a fundamental. Okay, I want to be working through this and understand where my blind spots are, where my triggers are, all of these things, which can be intimidating to a lot of people. So I think it takes a lot of courage to be able to want to grow through this sort of thing and gain that awareness, all of those things. So from a personal level makes total sense, harder to do obviously and put into action. And then
Yeah.
if you're a leader at a business, say you're a CEO or an HR leader or a manager, what are some tools that you would want to take away for your employees or organization wide around limiting beliefs and communicating that more holistically across your organization?
Well, one of the most impactful things a leader can do, which is not easy, is to demonstrate their own vulnerabilities, is to be true and honest. One of my favorite leaders when I worked at Quaker and then Pepsi was a man who was willing to share the challenges he's had and willing to share his growth through the process. And he went out of his way to invite others and to create a culture of safety, of emotional safety, where people
Yep.
can actually ask questions. I also truly believe in coaching as a leader to be able to provide that for your staff, your employees, because sometimes it is really helpful for them to have someone else to talk to about it, who's not their
Yes.
spouse, who's not a friend they complain to, who's someone who's going to help them have a productive conversation about it. Those are the two things that are really coming to my mind. I think it's just an openness and an embracing of this growth mindset.
Yeah, I think it's just like this, talk the talk, walk the walk mentality. And I mean, we've seen the value that coaching and more specifically providing that safe space for your people to grow personally and professionally. Obviously there's been a lot of conversation around mental health in the workplace and how can you increase access to behavioral health resources, and companies have been beefing up their EAP programs and thinking about different ways to offer more accessible mental health support. We view coaching a lot of times through the lens of how can we serve as an entry point for people to be more open to growing personally and professionally. And so, I mean, I've seen half of the people who use Boone today have never worked with any form of coach or therapist. So this is their first time in certain instances ever talking about what's going on in their lives. And the only reason they did that is because they saw this as a professional growth tool first and foremost. So creating that accessibility and that approachability that feels personalized for employees, we feel like is so important. And how do you personalize at scale is really the name of the game. But I think this was a lot of fun, Jen. I wish I think we could spend all day talking about this. I think we're going to have some separate episodes
Yeah,
dedicated to some
sounds
more
good.
specific topics in here. But
Yes.
thank you so much for your time. And yeah, this was great.
You're welcome. And the best practice in terms of coaching is life itself, right? So
Yeah.
when you work
Yeah.
overtime with a coach, it's the real life situations that come up that you come into the session and try these tools. That's what makes it come to life and become real in your life.
100%. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us,
You're
Jen. And
welcome.
and we'll be in touch soon.
Sounds good.